Some of the best victories are those you fight the hardest for. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 35 of F1 in Review, the episode in the hour where we discuss the Texas Grand Prix or the US Grand Prix, whatever you'd like to call it. I'm Tom Clabon and I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt. A reminder that you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter as well as the F1 in Review account, where these episodes are posted once they've gone live on River Radio and also once they've gone out via the podcast provider of your choice, be that Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you choose yourself. And we launch straight into the most obvious topic to start with. Red Bull have won the Constructors' Championship, a P1 and P4 finish for them, and a P2 and DNF for Ferrari was enough to crown them champions. Similar to the Drivers' Championship, really, it was more a question of when they would win, not if they would win this. Nevertheless, this is the first time they, or a non-Mercedes team, have won this championship since 2013, if you can believe this.
Wow.
Incredible, isn't it? Tristan, your thoughts on this about Red Bull finally breaking the dominance done by Mercedes for so many years?
Yeah, and it's back-to-back topics really on the theme of Red Bull success, because it has been I would say a pretty unmitigated success. We say unmitigated when it comes to disasters, but then, unlike Ferrari, it's been an unmitigated success. And if you asked me back at the beginning of the season, or yourself, Tom, or even Angus, who unfortunately can't be with us today, who would win the Constructors, I think we were all saying Ferrari. Or if you go back to testing, we were considering someone like Mercedes with their radical side pod design. But there's been no getting away from the fact that although Red Bull had a rocky start, they have been completely and, utterly dominant. There were swings and moments throughout the season where one might, ponder the idea of Ferrari getting their act together. And we did once or twice ask the question throughout this year whether or not the momentum behind Red Bull would slow down and whether or not anyone else could get their act together. But unfortunately, it just hasn't manifested. And so Red Bull has, with two fantastic drivers, and respect to them both, because Perez and Verstappen have been, I would say, on pretty top form this year, being able to, both of them, challenge Ferraris. We've had great drives from Verstappen, such as the last Grand Prix, and we had great drives from Perez, such as the Grand Prix before that in Suzuka. And both of them, I think, have worked really nicely with the team, just to, I suppose, manage themselves and not go for anything particularly special, but just go for consistent wins. And I think this week's Grand Prix in a Circuit of the Americas in Texas in the US, the second time I've been to the US this year, really demonstrated how Red Bull has been able to manage their season. Similarly to the season as a whole, it started off all right, but then a bit of a rocky bit, specifically when Red Bull called Max Verstappen in for a pit stop that lasted far too long, and as a result, Verstappen came out behind Lewis Hamilton and was able to eventually catch back up to Lewis Hamilton and pass him, having this incredible speed throughout the circuit and, being able to challenge a 7-time world champion with, what I thought was relative ease. Actually, there's a fantastic stat that Verstappen had on average over 7 kilometers an hour faster machinery going down the long back straight of Circuit of the Americas, which in Formula 1 is a massive amount of speed. And so they have been able to pick themselves up consistently and just finish the races in a consistent first place position, even though Charles Leclerc has been doing his best, I think, to try and challenge that, and Charles has had many pole positions. Just Max and Perez have been able to work with the team much better than I think anyone else in the sort of the top 3 teams, perhaps. And when I say work with, I mean also extract the full performance out of the car. I think Mercedes is just down on performance, and that's been unfortunate for them. Ferrari, as I say, is a less than the sum of their parts. I think, actually, to be honest, it's one of those weird cases where Red Bull has won this season and Ferrari completely lost it. I think if you were on paper, Ferrari might well have or should have won it, but the reality is, as I say, less than the sum of their parts. So it's really good to be able to be speaking about someone different from Mercedes winning the championship. We never got that last year. We had an unusual split where the world champion Max Verstappen was not driving for the team that won the Constructors Championship, which was Mercedes. But this time they've managed to take the double glory. And, I think it would have been nice if there was only one criticism. I think it would have been nice if we had the surprise of Red Bull winning both titles closer to the end. We've still got a bit of a way to go till we get to Abu Dhabi. And yet again, demonstrating why Abu Dhabi pays so much money for the final race of the championship. They pay so much money for that. And every so often, I guess, it pays its dividends. But in reality, we're all expecting Mexico, Brazil, or even Circuit of the Americas to show off who's going to be winning the World Championship. But Tom, what do you think? Was it a foregone conclusion that Red Bull were going to win the Constructors Championship? And if so, when did you start to think that they would be able to claim the title?
Well, certainly not from the start. I mean, when you look back at testing, Ferrari was so dominant, came up the traps really well there. Mercedes were an unknown package in many regards, and Red Bull were very strong. But it seemed that Ferrari could, if they really did pull it together, get out of the traps and go and win at least one of the championships. Because I remember quite vividly, really, in our sort of pre-season discussion, we were all in agreement that we wouldn't have a double dominance of both championships, i.e. Ferrari, let's say, would win the drivers, and then Red Bull win the Constructors, or vice versa, or Mercedes would get involved, that type of thing. So the fact that Red Bull have romped home really in both championships is a testimony to them. I mean, the fact that they've won 15 out of 19 races so far this season is just frankly astounding. And when you consider as well that if you're judging on qualifying pace, they are quite obviously the second best car.
Yeah.
In terms of Ferrari, always seem to get the pole position, with a few exceptions, of course, then somehow lose it when it comes to the race. And of course, you can go and say in some regards, Ferrari lost it owing to strategy, to reliability issues, to a whole range of things. But Red Bull were always there, always ready to pounce, be that if there were a mistake or if there wasn't one, they had to go and do it the old-fashioned way of physically overtaking the various cars. So credit to them, really. They've really deserved this, and it's nice to see as well that it's been a sort of a double victory in regards that Perez is showing his worth to the team. I remember last season his form was best described as patchy. He came in, did well in a few races towards the start, then tailed off, then came back again. And then particularly towards the end, he was so instrumental in getting Verstappen that driver's championship. But he was never really at the races there to go and make sure they were really competitive in the Constructors. Compare that last season to Bottas and Hamilton, the well-oiled machine. Even Bottas, when he was sort of, I suppose, on the decline and on the way out, he was always ready and willing and there to go and snatch a victory if needed. Perez has really risen to that occasion this season and is growing into the Red Bull team, and proving his worth there. And it's quite ironic because I remember at the start of the season I was so confident in thinking, yep, Leclerc and Sainz, the best driver duo any constructor has this season throughout the grid, they're going to romp home, at least in the constructors, because they have the best drivers, and the car's pretty good as well. That's nice. But I think it's one of those, it's easy to say, isn't it, that Ferrari have lost this, but that would be taking away the shine from how consistent Red Bull have been, because aside from maybe a pit stop here or there, they've never really let themselves down or let the team down, really. There's never been a clear and obvious error where they've cost themselves a race win. It's always been a case of, well, at the start of Bahrain, for example, that was a reliability powertrain issue. Looking across here, a few second places now and again, that was owing to technical issues, such as that during the race, for example, not necessarily pit stops or poor strategy calls. So credit to them again. They've shown the dominance they had with Sebastian Vettel in this sort of late and early 2010s. The question now is, are they going to be able to replicate that moving forwards? There's the cost cap sanction that's still looming over them. We're yet to know what that is and whether that will hinder them moving forwards, or whether they're able to sort of overcome the sanction in many ways it's going to be put upon them. But credit to them. As I say, as you say as well, it's a shame as a spectator, as a fan, we're not going to have that dramatic conclusion, that duel in the desert 2.0 in Abu Dhabi, really. Yeah. But it's one of those where you can't really be too annoyed at that, because Red Bull deserve to win this championship fair and square, really.
Absolutely, but I want to mention someone else as well, because we've identified some of the core components of a great team, and that's the strategists. Red Bull has been absolutely on it when it comes to the strategy, and people like Hannah Schmitz, who has been fantastic throughout the year, pulled out some cracking strategy ideas, and behind her as well there will be a team of people who unfortunately we don't know, but their strategy at Red Bull has been far superior to Ferrari, and unfortunately Ferrari just didn't know what hit them when it came to that. So we got characters like Hannah Schmitz, but also the car's designer as well, and the engineers, led by Adrian Newey. And if you don't know how good Adrian Newey is, then I will quickly read out some of the statistics for him. Ooh. So Newey's designs have won 191 Grand Prix as of the United States Grand Prix, and his designs have won 11 Constructors Championships with 3 different Formula One teams. Ooh. 7 different drivers winning the Drivers' Championships, driving Newey's designs. Mm-hmm. This is someone who's worked for Williams, McLaren, and Red Bull, and that cannot be overlooked. That yet again, Adrian Newey has helped propel a team to success. And to be clear, he hasn't always had successes. No one always does, but this is a man who has thrown a lot of darts at the dartboard and had apparently 11 bullseyes, if you like. So Red Bull really does have a fantastic team behind him, mm-hmm. And the character within the team now, I think, has got itself up to a new level, and I think that's going to make them very, very difficult to beat going forward. And of course, I know there's going to be the looming dark cloud, which is this budget cap issue, but we are aware of it, but we're not really going to talk about it until we have the facts, because we've expressed before our concerns and our frustrations with the potential breaches and what we think should be done. So please go back a podcast and you'll be able to hear that. But we will address that when it comes out, because so far we've heard is the FIA saying that they're going to put sort of what I'd like to say a plea deal to Red Bull, whereby they can sort of agree to the fact that they've breached it and they'll get a lesser penalty. But to be honest, Tom, I think that's a massive cop-out from both sides. Either the FIA have got it right, in which case Red Bull get punished, or Red Bull have got it right, in which case they haven't breached it and they shouldn't get punished. The FIA being like, well, if you admit you did something wrong, we'll give you a lesser penalty, kind of makes it sound like that they haven't got a leg to stand on. But again, that could just be the FIA being nice. This is why we don't know, and So yes, stay tuned, I guess, for our thoughts on that once we actually hear something. Unfortunately, it's been a while now, and we have yet to. I'm almost expecting, Tom, a little sign to flash up and be like, Red Bull investigation will take place after the season.
Yes, yeah.
But
and it just rumbles on and on.
Just make a decision. Either they have or they haven't. But anyway, that's the dark cloud looming over all of this. But the reality is, Max Verstappen, fantastic. Sergio Perez, Minister of Defence, challenging people like Charles Leclerc in Japan and taking that second place away from him. Handing Max the Drivers' Championship. Perez, helping Red Bull get the Constructors' Championship. Strategy headed up people like Hannah Schmitz, fantastic. Adrian Newey, with the money and the resources behind it, doing fantastic work again. And yes, they made a mistake at the weekend, but also the Red Bull pit crew as well, delivering incredible speeds of pit stops. Yes. Imagine, Tommy, you could go into a garage and get your tyres changed in just 2.1 seconds. Absolutely
unbelievable.
Insane.
Yep.
And these things matter. So, yeah. What do you think, Tom? 2023? Who have you got your money on?
Oh, well, I think Red Bull are certainly going to be up there. I think the Ferrari will be there as well, but I think until there's huge personnel change, they're not going to be in it to win it type thing. I think Mercedes will return next season in full force. They'll be above third, and they'll be there, and not just there by default. I think we're going to see a rekindling of the 2021 championship, Red Bull versus Mercedes. This time, though, with the new driver of George Russell adding into that contest, really. And I think it's worth saying as well, before we, I suppose, move on from the topic of Red Bull, it's quite fitting as well that they won this Constructors when, unfortunately, the creator of the Red Bull empire, I suppose, in many ways, particularly when it comes to the racing department, Dietrich Mateschitz has unfortunately passed away, age 78. So our thoughts are with everyone involved with Red Bull, everyone who knew him, family and friends and the rest. But a fitting tribute that they won, unfortunately, when he was unfortunately passed away this weekend. But a credit to him and a credit to what he's created, really, because I think if you go back in time to when he bought Jaguar and made the Red Bull car, there was very few who thought that they would A, go on to win a Drivers' Championship, B, go on to win a Constructors' Championship, or even C, to go and do it many a time. So congratulations to all involved there. And Red Bull are really showing their quality. They're showing, I suppose, the ruthlessness that Mercedes have had for so many years, in terms of they hardly make a mistake, and if they do make a mistake, it's a minor one which doesn't really have a serious impact. Like, for example, in this season, their mistakes came after they won the Drivers' Championship, and when they're on the cusp there of winning the Constructors, is credit to them and their, I suppose, high performance environment that they create, really. And of course, there's going to be those who say, but the cost cap and this, that and the other, but you can't sort of, I suppose, look at this situation and go, these people are not talented, these people do not know how to go and execute A, race car creation, or B, a race strategy over and over and over again, because it's not been even vaguely close in either championship, really. As I said in my introduction, it's been a question of when, not if, they would win both the Drivers and Constructors from only a few races in. So credit to them again. I think if they carry this on, we could be seeing Verstappen winning many more championships. We could even see Perez being a lot closer as well, because the fact that you have two drivers very much at the front there, and we had a whole episode, or a large portion of it, discussing how Perez could even challenge Verstappen for the championship, is a credit to the fact that it is no longer the Verstappen show. Yes, Verstappen is of course the number one driver, he is the golden boy of this team, but they can create two excellent cars that can suit two different drivers and then go on and win races. So lessons for Ferrari to learn, certainly. Take a few notes out of their book, because boy oh boy, they've got to get their act together if they really want to mount a serious challenge against a ruthless team in Mercedes, and also a ruthless team in Red Bull as well. One's been missing from the fight, but both will be back next season, I think.
Definitely. And one thing to watch going forward, now that the title of Drivers' Champion has been taken by Max Verstappen, if we could just thumb out Max Verstappen for a moment and look at second and third, Charles Leclerc is only ahead of Perez by 2 points. Yeah. So that's going to be really down to the wire. We have some other fantastic battles going on. So if you are a bit sad that the drivers' champion has been declared already. Ignore it and look at second and third, because Perez versus Leclerc could be a really, really fun battle all the way to the end, because they seem to be trading blows consistently. And on that as well, George Russell in fourth place and Carlos Sainz in fifth place. Again, another tight battle with Lewis Hamilton only 4 points behind that. So we have a three-way fight really for, I'd say, fourth place. So we got a two-way fight for second and a three-way fight for fourth. So, there is plenty to go on in F1 at the moment. And this stuff really does matter, because second or third in F1 is a significant milestone for many of these up-and-coming drivers. Imagine if George, on his first year at Mercedes, ended up getting third place. Well, I mean, it'd be insane, but he's only he's only 47 points behind Sergio Perez, so
it's possible.
It's possible. But if George hangs on to fourth though, and beats Sainz and Hamilton, that would be insane. That would be one hell of a an opening season for him. George Russell coming out pulling his punches. That's if he can avoid driving into people. He's done that a lot this year. George, stop driving into people, because if it was Lance Stroll, for example, we wouldn't be as kind.
No.
So yeah, let's hope that particular part of George's season sort of comes to an end. But if he can keep it on the road, I think fourth place would be good for him. But yes, Sergio Perez again is now fighting Charles Leclerc for that second place, and I think Red Bull would love to have the Constructors' Championship and then their drivers come in first and second place. That's like Mercedes-esque levels of dominance in the season.
The fact you go on to that battle there between fourth and fifth place, and as we say earlier, Ferrari, in theory at least, have the best car in terms of performance, and the fact that they could be beaten in the Constructors by the third best car and even the second best car, if you're looking at Perez and Leclerc, is quite the statement to make for both teams, both positive and negative. And that's before we get onto the Constructors' Championship, which is all still to play for. We hinted at it earlier, but of course, in prior episodes we spoke about the battle between Alpine versus McLaren, and that's before we get down to the very bottom. And as you say there, Tristan, this really matters insofar that the prize money you get or don't get will affect the car you're able to create next season, because yes, there's a cost cap budget, but if you have more cash in your armoury, you can pay more for driver salaries, for example, staff recruitment, all these sort of things that can really be the difference between getting fifth or sixth next season, or fourth or fifth, or winning certain races, or getting into the points and all that sort of stuff. So keep a firm eye, really, I'd say, on the drivers and constructors, because that could give us a glimpse of what's to come next season, because there's no regulation change compared to, suppose, 21 to 22, so there will be a continuation of these rules, so we can see perhaps a glimpse into the future, or an inkling about what's to come and who's going to be at the races and who's going to be maybe plumb last again. So looking now at the race, the Texan or US Grand Prix, whatever you like to call it, Alonso is in the news this week. He was handed a 30-second penalty by the FIA, who deemed that his car was in an unsafe condition, quote, and Alonso then took to Instagram, I believe, to go and say, after this was given to him, "It is an important day for the sport, as this decision will dictate if we are going in the right direction." Now, for those who don't know, this comes after a 180-mile-an-hour crash with Lance Stroll. This damaged Alonso's front wing. This all comes after a 180-mile-an-hour crash with Lance Stroll. This damaged his wing mirror and a range of other aerodynamic parts. This is all despite him climbing up to P7. He did this in a severely damaged car. Congratulations to him. Or maybe not, because Haas protested this, the fact that he was able to climb up to said P7 in a damaged car after the allotted time, it's worth saying. And it also comes after the fact that the stewards in the FIA no longer, or did not say to Alonso he had to come in and pit and repair his car during the race. They protested about this, and they said that he should have been shown the black and orange flag, him being Alonso. And Haas have been protesting about this because, to be fair, they've been sort of hampered or unfairly picked on in some regards when it comes to the black and orange flag. And for those of you who don't know what that means, when that is waved by the stewards, that means that a car has to come in and repair their car, or indeed, I suppose, take it out of the race entirely if it is deemed undrivable. So what do we make then of the situation we have there? We have Alonso beating all the odds, surviving a huge crash, climbing into the point, and then having it snatched away after the race.
Yeah, I know, we're never far away from controversies, are we? Because this was quite a weird penalty. Let's face it. Because after the Grand Prix on Sunday, I sort of said goodnight, went to bed, and then I woke up to find that, well, Alonso had been given a 30-second penalty for something that the FIA didn't pick up on during the race. And to be clear, it's not Haas's fault, because they're sticking by the rules. They present a challenge and they go up to the steward and say, look, we don't think that you have administered the rules in a way that is acceptable. And then the stewards look at that petition and go, right, okay, well, we'll review it. And in this particular instance, they've returned and said Alpine ran the car in an unsafe condition, and as a result, they have been penalised quite heavily. I mean, they've effectively given them the heaviest penalty they really can, which, okay, there are two schools of thought. One is it is the drivers and the team's responsibility to manage the performance of the car and its structural integrity. Drivers don't crash or avoid crashes, and the team also pulls you in if you have a problem with the vehicle. But then the other school of thought is a team and a driver is never going to penalise themselves, and so it is down to the stewards to ensure that the black and orange flag, or as it's colloquially known now, the meatball flag, is waved to force a team in, because they're not going to be penalising themselves. Look at Kevin Magnussen, who has had that poor black and orange meatball flag waved at him a couple of times now for the same reasons. It's the front wing end plate, which helps direct air, amongst other things, is a bit flappy, and if it doesn't come off, then they were called in. And Kevin Magnussen was called in twice for the same problem, and they've said, look, people are running the cars in unsafe conditions as unsafe conditions as me, and why haven't you done anything? And so the FIA have turned around and said, yeah, well, we agree, massive penalty. And of course, this runs issues now, because I think, and this is a personal opinion, that those sort of penalties, running a car in an unsafe condition, can only be given during a race. Because my argument, if you get to the end of the race, is you didn't run the car in an unsafe condition, because as you can see from history, there was no safety sort of elements that were particularly compromised and no one got hurt. So the point of these rules are, you can't guarantee that, let's say, a wing mirror wouldn't come off and hit someone, and so you call them in to get it fixed just in case. But we now know, because we watched the race, that the wing mirror fell off and hit harmlessly into the ground and didn't cause any damage. And so you can't really apply that theoretical circumstance, which is the foundation for why you apply the rule, because now we have concrete evidence to suggest they didn't run it in an unsafe way, right?
Yeah.
Does that
exactly.
make sense? Because
Absolutely does. Yeah.
It's a rule that we apply to stop a theoretical problem. We are in hindsight now, which means we can apply the rule using the knowledge that we have of the race. And so to me, it seems bizarre. I think what the result of the petition from Haas should have been is they went, oh yes, we have established that we have a problem here. in future, any circumstance similar to that will definitely be black and orange flag, because this is the problem. You can't really apply it here, because now I expect Alpine to turn around and say, but we didn't run it in an unsafe way because no one was hurt, our drivers were fine, and look, we did, all right at the end of it. Mm-hmm. With one of the best drives from Alonso that we've had for ages.
Agreed.
And so I'm a bit stuck here, because I'm a big advocate for rules when it comes to safety, but a lot of the rules are there to prevent problems with safety, and there wasn't a problem with the safety here. So I feel like we have to apply it like we would, as we do with many things on reflection, which is that shouldn't have happened, absolutely, but it has happened, and we will do better going forward. And to be honest, I think the FIA had it right with Magnussen, where they applied it during the race, but for some reason they just didn't bother with Alonso. Not sure why, but I think the onus here is on the FIA, because no team is going to penalise themselves.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's ultimately a competitive sport. People want to get the advantage. They want to get points. They want to win. And why on earth they go, well, fair's fair. That's looking a bit dodgy. Just to be safe, let's retire the car. I understand why Haas are a bit miffed, as you say. They were penalised quite unfairly, I think, in Canada, when Magnussen was similarly running in the points, and he was told almost immediately that his end plate looked slightly sort of wavy in many ways. He had to come in. The flag was flown, and that was that. He was at the points. He went to the very back from memory, and there was no points to be seen that day. But once again, we're talking about the FIA, the inconsistencies, the confusion they're creating with their rules, and I think this is an example of them being easily swayed and panicking. They've ultimately received this from Haas outside the allotted time, which raises its own questions as well, and gone, oh blimey, yeah, we really should have done something there. Let's go and lay down the law, smack this down on Alonso and Alpine, say naughty, naughty, and try and deter anything similar like this happening in the future. But if anything, I think the reverse has happened. They've opened up a few more questions about themselves and why they've made various decisions. I mean, take for example the fact that Perez had a very similar situation with his end plate. We've seen various other drivers in the past being told, you've got to come and pit, it's unsafe, you've got to go and change that. He wasn't. Alonso similarly wasn't as well, but Alonso is retrospectively punished, but Perez isn't. So it raises a few more questions there as well. I think it's one of those where ultimately a driver and a constructor is going to know when a car is unsafe, know when a car is not going to be able to either be racy, do its best, or be a danger to others. That's what you see and hear other people, or people in the garage, should I say, or paddock, go to various drivers, stop the car, retire the car, come in, box this lap, we're going to retire the car. They're not morons where they're going to go and send their drivers out there in things which are going to go and cause themselves damage. That is the drivers or other drivers cause them damage or threaten their life as well. So there is a situation there where I think where if a car is fine, if it is still racy, if it is still in a decent condition, as Alonso's was, I think, there'll be a conversation between the driver and the paddock, and they'll go, oh, okay, well, the car's still going fine, it's still in a decent condition, we'll carry on. But if it wasn't in said decent condition and was unsafe, it would have been parked up and retired. So more confusion there from the FIA. I think it also gives the impression that their decisions are malleable, they can be easily swayed if someone comes sort of raging and screaming and say, hey, this isn't fair. So once again, we saw this in Japan, we saw this as well in Singapore, we saw this perhaps as well, you could even say at Monza, where the FIA are making some very strange decisions. They're not really being scrutinised for them, and they are dominating conversations like this we have after the race. We'd love to go and talk about how Alonso came back after a huge collision where he essentially did a wheelie and got into P7 and got some valuable points for Alpine in the battle against McLaren. But no, we're talking about how those points were taken away in a whole mist of confusion, really. So the FIA need to do better moving forwards. I hate to be a broken record on this, but they need to go and decide on their rules, make the rules clear and stand by that. And as you say in future, this will be the rule, end of, for various car, for various constructor. We made a mistake here, or we didn't make a mistake, but just make a decision without harking back to the cost cap situation. The whole sort of deal they're trying to strike with Red Bull reminds me similarly of the Saudi Grand Prix, where they tried to go and sort of strike a deal with what the restart grid would look like. I'd like the FIA just to go and block out all the noise, make a decision and go from there. I'd much rather them do that and get it wrong than sort of try and pander and have a conversation, and then we're questioning their credibility again.
Yep, absolutely. And again, it fits into the bit of a joke that's becoming will be investigated after the race. Yeah. It's really annoying, and I feel actually more for our listeners and the community who have to experience this more than us because we're in Europe. But going to bed after a race, being like, "Oh, well, that was nice," I was talking to my family, being like, "Oh, fantastic, great from Vettel and Alonso, two fantastic, drivers, and Alonso especially having that big crash and still being able to get straight back up into the points like nothing had happened, brilliant." And then I wake up and it's like, oh, I guess the hopes and dreams of that have been ruined.
Yeah,
because we don't want to be investigating this stuff after the race. We don't want to have the potential podium will be. Things need to be sorted out within the allotted time frame. Because it's ridiculous to have things, and I understand that there may be circumstances where perhaps we should investigate things after the race because things will take time and things will need to be reviewed and whatnot. But this is pretty easy in my mind to look at. Right, it's not like Alonso disappeared. He wasn't in camouflage. He drove around that track as many times as everyone else. He was lucky to drive that track around as many times as everyone else, given that Stroll did his best to end his race early. But there's no getting away from the fact that they had plenty of time to look at Alonso's car. And they must have looked at the Alonso's car. This is what also gets me. They must have looked at Alonso's car. Because they must have decided whether or not to give Alonso a penalty. They would have said, well, is he at fault? Is he not at fault? Then they would have seen the battles that we saw with his wing mirrors falling off and bits of his car flying off. Yeah, I think it probably should have been a black and orange flag. But the fact is, one wasn't waved. It kind of... Do you remember it's in Japan? They waved the checkered flag a lap early. Yeah?
Oh, they did, yeah. Yep.
Now... It would be like, let's take that example, waving it early, and every driver then slowing down and coming in and pulling into the pit lane and whatnot, and the FIA have been like, oh well, you breached the rules because you came in too early, you stacked up. Every driver gets a penalty because of our mistake. You should have actually done another flying lap, by the way, because technically speaking, you didn't finish the race, and then you all got your car.
You.
Yeah, got you there. But we were like, well, hold on a minute. That's your decision. This is your choice. You can't. It's like it's a technicality. Oh, well, I know we technically didn't wave it to you, but you should have imagined we did. That sort of thing. You go, well, hold on a minute. It's your choice. You are the stewards at the time making these decisions, and I don't know, it just detracts from what was a really good race. And the other thing is, there were elements that we should be talking about instead, like the fact that when Alonso was on two wheels, looking like he just pulled a massive wheelie, as you said, Tom, on the straight there is a sort of a sticky out bit on the left hand side where the barriers are broken on purpose, which Alonso could have smashed into and really damaged himself because he would have been going not into a flat barrier but into an end of a barrier. Right, consider those sort of safety points. Go, actually, that's highlighted a bit of an issue here. But no, we're talking about how the FIA have inflicted a penalty, which I think is personally a bit unfair. But you may disagree with me, but I would like to hear whether or not the community disagrees with me. I think, roughly speaking, looking at opinion polls, by opinion polls I mean the general consensus on Twitter, people seem to be. It seems to me like the general sentiment is Alonso probably shouldn't have been punished here. And again, Tom, was it right, the level of penalty he was given as well, as opposed to something like a fine?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I've never seen, unless one's happened recently and I've just blacked out on this, I've not seen a 30-second penalty be given before. I've seen 20, seen 25, 10, 5, whatever, drive-through penalty, etc., but never a 30. And I think a financial one or a starting grid penalty, maybe for the next Grand Prix, would have made a bit more sense to go, oh, okay, well, technically you were driving an unsafe car there. We won't take those points away from you because, let's be fair, you did an excellent job, but maybe a 2-place grid penalty next Grand Prix in Mexico, or a fine, that will sort you out. But a 30-second just seems really excessive for a mistake that he didn't make. It is a mistake that the FIA have made, and they've gone, oh, well, it's not our fault, it's his. And how do we spin that? We'll give him a huge penalty.
Massive.
It's not like he's literally endangered somebody else by T-boning them and then, walked away from the car and not tried to help them out or something. I mean, it's just remarkable that they've gone this hard after the allotted time for someone who's essentially done what the sport is all about, and that is overcome adversity, show his ability, and do quite well. So I do agree with Alonso's statement about what direction the sport wants to go in, because at the moment it seems to be de-incentivising excellent hard work.
Yep, and it's not over. But I should mention for clarity that this is not over. If you haven't been keeping up, and I don't blame you, because to be honest, you might, to some extent, you might as well just wait to find out at the very end of this what happens. But Alpine has lodged a sort of a retort to this, and is challenging the decision. So on Thursday of this week, so on the 27th of October, Alpine will find out whether or not the stewards and the FIA will allow them to protest this decision. and so at that point, we will then go to another hearing. So this hearing on the 27th is to find out whether or not there can be a hearing in protest. This is how bureaucratic it is. And if they do go to protest, then they might get this overruled, in which case all the points changed and stuff again. And it just gets so long and so boring going through this. And I think there is one more element to this which kind of frustrates me, is it doesn't give the opportunity for Alonso or Alpine to do anything about it. And I get that harsh penalties need to be handed out, but in all cases, you usually get to be able to do something about it. In a race, if you are given a 5-second time penalty, you are able to pull away from the person behind you and overcome that 5-second gap to try and retain your position. If you're given a 10-second drive-through penalty or stop-and-go penalty, heaven forbid, you are able to capitalise on other situations, try and do something about it. This gave Alonso no opportunity to do something about it. You might say, well, yeah, but he couldn't possibly have done something about it. And that may be true, but you don't know. You don't know that. You don't know what could have happened, if they give him a penalty in the race. Because giving it to him at the end means a 30-second penalty is applied. If they had given him a meatball flag and he'd ignored it and they gave him a drive-through penalty during the race, then he would have been on fresher tyres and he could have made up some of those positions back. Could have been in 12th place as opposed to 15th place. The point is, something could have been done. Doing it at the end with no opportunity to defend his positions, I think, is particularly savage by the FIA, because it's a slam dunk 30 seconds, no ifs, no buts. You're in 15th place in a race, unless you literally get that sort of penalty on the last lap. It's 30 seconds. What can you do about it to try and mitigate the problem? And I think that, to me, is particularly why I think this is such a difficult decision for the FIA to defend, because we've seen lesser penalties for worse. I mean, I think Lance Stroll came off pretty easy from this. He only got a couple of grid place penalties. Then why is this not a grid place penalty as well? Because at least in the next race, Alonso can do something about it.
Yep. Exactly that. If it's a grid place penalty of 2, he could easily overcome that because of the racecraft quality he showed in a dilapidated car in the last race, and as he's shown in the last few years of his career, really. So, shameful, really. And we move from Alpine and Alonso to Magnussen and Haas. Congratulations to them. Magnussen flew from P13 to P8. It was nearly P7, but then Vettel stole that away literally on the last few corners. Meanwhile, his teammates, Mick Schumacher, went from P16 to P14. No points for him. But irrespective of his poor form, Magnussen's points mean that Haas now go up to 8th place. For those who listened last episode, we spoke about the battle at the bottom between sort of P8, P9, P7, and Haas have got themselves some great momentum there, as have Aston Martin as well, to their credit. So what are our thoughts there on Kevin Magnussen? The first time he's got points in a fair few races. You have to go all the way back to Austria for the last time where he or a Haas driver, be that him or Mick Schumacher, got themselves some points in an F1 race this season.
Definitely a surprise. Definitely a surprise. And Kevin Magnussen, wow, what a race for him, because it kind of had sort of the feeling of Alex Albon Australia this year, when a surprise, a gamble, a stroke of genius, some might say, it turned out to be the perfect move. And that stroke of genius was basically doing Circuit of the Americas, a 2-stop track on one set of tyres. With one pit stop, I should say, for clarity there. Which was brave. He did 38 laps on a set of mediums at Circuit of the Americas, where other teams, other drivers were unable to stretch their tyres that far and had to do 2 stops or more. And just made up less time. That's it. That's how he did it. It's not brilliant, to be honest. It's not like it as some daftly crafty situation. Kevin Magnussen just looked at his tyres and went, "Yeah, they'll do," and just continued to drive. And as I say, it kind of felt like Alex Albon in Australia, where he basically did where Alex Albon pit to the last lap he possibly could, came out and got a point. And Kevin Magnussen, on the other hand, sort of took that to another level, which was, quite something. And it's a shame that it also didn't work out for Schumacher as well, because Schumacher had a good opportunity, but unfortunately just could not keep his tyres in the same condition. Ended up being in 14th place. So unfortunately, that's a bit of hard luck for Schumacher, but Haas actually did say, and Gunsteiner was asked, why did Magnussen do well and Schumacher didn't? And Gunter basically turned around and said, well, that's because we had to pit Schumacher and he couldn't really get his tyres to last as well. But Magnussen managed to, keep those tyres going, a bit of a tyre whisperer moment, and ending up in 8th place is really, really good, getting 4 more points for Haas, and just solidifying really for Haas why they have him in the team, because there is only 2 points now between AlphaTauri in 9th place and themselves in 8th place. And so without Kevin Magnussen doing those really, really good performance pieces, they would be in 9th place. And so you look at Schumacher and you go, well, it's a shame that you couldn't also kind of do that, because they need these points, and the battle for 8th place is really hotting up. And again, confirms to me why Magnussen is going to be in the team going forward. Whether or not Schumacher will be by his side is, I guess, yet to be decided. Although, he does bring with him a good name and a lot of money and things like that. But to be honest, it is Kevin Magnussen who's doing really, really well and pulling out the big punches.
It really is the Kevin Magnussen show, isn't it, really? And I've ummed and ahed about Schumacher and his future moving forwards. And time is running out, and if I were to make a decision now, as I imagine Günther Steiner and Gene Haas are, I don't think he's done enough to stay in the sport, because he's crashed a lot, be that in practice, qualifying and the race. It's cost the team a lot of money. Let's remember back to Saudi Arabia, for example, where the cost was so great and the risk was so huge that he didn't even feel the car. And yes, that's only one example, and maybe that's me being a bit harsh, but there's been a number of occasions where Schumacher's got close to points and then owing to a mistake by himself, he's not been able to execute that. Compare that to Magnussen, for example, who we look at this race, for example, and he's blown all expectations out the water. He's been very crafty. He's managed the tyres extremely well and gone on to get some really important points, because, as we say, it is so tight at the bottom there between 8th and 9th, for example. And when you consider that Haas were nowhere last season, it could be a huge difference when it comes to next season in terms of whether they do finish in 8th or 9th now that Uralkali has gone with the Mazepins, and now they have got another sponsor in, but I'm doubtful with respect to them if they'll be able to plough as much money into the team as Uralkali did for this season. But then again, if I were to play devil's advocate, I think that Schumacher falls into the Tsunoda camp when we look at AlphaTauri, for example, of he's not good enough to stay on merit, but there's not anybody else who's going to replace him and do a better job. And I look at someone like Giovinazzi, for example. I personally don't rate him, but him crashing minutes into his first practice session. You look at someone like Hülkenberg, who is a reserve driver and has not really set the world alight when he's come in for Aston Martin. There's not really anybody else who is going to go and do better than Schumacher, I think. So because of the money, because of the recognition and the brand awareness that Schumacher, the name, brings, and the fact that he does have some quality, it may be worth keeping him moving forwards, but he's hardly got there on merit in my view. He's got there perhaps more on the fact that there is no one better than him to replace him, which is a shame because he is a good driver. He does have good attributes, as Gene has said, but in Gene Haas's own words, he's got potential, but he's costing us a lot of money, really, and that's hard to get away from that when you look at the entirety of the season.
Yeah, that's very true, and to some extent, Haas if they didn't pick Schumacher, would be somewhat in a bit of a talent deficit, and the obvious answer is to look into Formula 2. Although Logan Sargent has been announced for Williams, so clearly there's some of the F2 fresh blood, for lack of a better phrase, up and coming talent has been snaffled away. But then, there are people like, Drogovic, F2 champion. Yeah. But, unfortunately, he's part of the Aston Martin driver development program. Mm-hmm. So, the wrong side of the driving market. But to be honest, when has that ever stopped anyone getting into Formula 1? Like, if they went to Drogovic and were like, hey, do you want to see? I can't see him saying no. But yeah. It would be another gamble, and we know how that worked for Haas in previous years. Never forget when we had Schumacher and Mazepin together, and Steiner, team principal, said, we've got two very young drivers, but we think that's going to be the key to our success, and they ended up coming last. So it's not always true that young talent brings with it a fresh face and a fresh paint of good luck, but it definitely can't help. But I think we've got to give Schumacher another year personally, and I kind of agree with all the sentiments you've said. Better the devil you know, and all that sort of stuff. But when you compare the two drivers, I just wonder what could have been. We've got Kevin Magnussen now only 3 points behind Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo's in 12th and Magnussen in 13th. And given that Daniel is, well, he's not doing great. I could see Kevin Magnussen potentially beating Ricciardo if Ricciardo continues to fail to get any points. Magnussen seems to be able to pick points out. Perhaps we're not expecting to. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a weird season next year if we're still talking about it right to the very end out of Schumacher and any other driver, maybe Drogovic, maybe not. But if you're Gene, I don't think it's too tricky at the moment to keep Schumacher for all those reasons.
Absolutely right. And looking at another team that's been in the news for all the right reasons in terms of this race, you've got a team that love the drivers they know, but one of the drivers who's doing so well for them, Sebastian Vettel, is leaving the sport and leaving on a high. Qualified P10, he finished P7. He was very much dueling at the front for a while, and then the last lap, as I say, he nabbed that 7th place from Kevin Magnussen. And I think it's fair to say he's on a bit of a purple patch, really. He started off a bit neither here nor there. You wondered whether he was going to do a Raikkonen and then fade out the sport and not do too well. But here he is, now P11 in the Drivers' Championship. He's now got a string of 3 races where he's got back-to-back points going from Singapore to the US. He's got P8, P6 and P7. And looking at how poorly Valtteri Bottas and Alfa Romeo is doing, he could even get himself into the top half of the table, which is quite remarkable considering how up and down and volatile Aston Martin's season have been so far.
very volatile. And just when you thought Sebastian Vettel was out, he comes out with an absolutely cracking race. And the only downside of it was Aston Martin's excellent performance, and specifically Sebastian Vettel's excellent performance, was it took away points from Kevin Magnussen. But it gave us some fantastic racing. And don't just take it from me. Take it from Magnussen, who said, and I'm quoting here, Vettel battles some of the best racing I've ever been involved with.
Wow.
Racing against him, it doesn't just feel like it's the end of his career. Just great driving from him. But of course, I'm annoyed with myself that I lost on the last lap, but still good points for us. So, clearly from Kevin Magnussen's side, he was obviously upset that he didn't get points, but absolutely fantastic to watch this racing. And to me, it just reminded me of watching Sebastian Vettel at his pinnacle. Just for whatever reason, everything was switched on. We saw a younger Sebastian Vettel, a 2013, 2014 Sebastian Vettel, who, wow, he just had his talent at his peak, and it was lovely. It really was lovely, and it reminded me why I like to I was so annoyed with Sebastian Vettel back in those days, because he was pretty dominant, and of course, we'd always like to root for the underdog. And so, looking at Sebastian Vettel now, it's a shame, of course, looking at that one race that he's going at the end of the season. But we can't let it cloud our judgment. That's the only my own caveat to that, is it can't let us cloud our judgment. And he's got to make way for new talent, up and coming talent, and I hope he can do. Still be in the sport from the sidelines and influencing in a way that other drivers like Niki Lauda used to for Mercedes. But my goodness, if there was ever an argument to keep him in the sport, that was one of them. Pure driving class from a 4-time world champion. There's a reason why he's in our intro to this podcast.
Absolutely, and it's got to the position now where, owing to his racing ability, owing to the points he's getting week in, week out, with one or two exceptions, I'd be really disappointed if Aston Martin don't get P6 in the Constructors' Championship, because similar to Haas, they've got one driver doing a lot of the legwork, be that recently. Alfa Romeo, I think it's worth saying, have been on an awful run of form. It started off so well, and then it got to the point of the British Grand Prix, and it's gone horribly wrong since then. For context, they have only scored 1 point. This is both Alfa Romeo drivers. This is the team, this is the constructors. They have scored 1 point in 10 races. I mean, they're 1 point now ahead of Aston Martin. It's gone horribly wrong for them, and it's a shame, really. But credit to Aston Martin, credit to Sebastian Vettel for pulling the team up by their bootstraps and getting them into P6. And it's a shame, really, that Alonso is going to be the one benefiting from this versus Vettel. But the whole ambition of Aston Martin being a proper formidable team moving forwards that could challenge Alfa Romeo and dare even say McLaren moving forwards is looking a lot more credible when you consider the amount of money they could be getting for P6, in addition to what is being created off track in terms of the development there as well. So congratulations to Vettel, but what earth is happening to Alfa Romeo?
Well, I mean, that's a real strange one, isn't it, the Alfa Romeo situation, and one that we'll cover once we got some more fixed information on it towards the end of the season. But for a team that has been flying, or was flying in the first half of the season, has just been collections of, well, let's face it, after Canada, their points tally looks more like a series of computer binary code than actual points. It's just zeros and ones, and even then it's mostly zeros. So it's a real shame. And to be honest, we had Bottas who spun out and said that, oh, it's my fault. And, well, where's Guan Yu Zhou? Where was he in the race, Tom? Did you remember? Did you see him? Did you remember him?
Not really. He retired, didn't he? Oh no, P11. P11? Yeah, yep. P11. But yeah, he was neither here nor there. The fact that I can't even remember where it was, whether he's on the track, sort of says everything, doesn't it, really? And it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 35 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening towards the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider, your Apple, your Spotify, your Pod Follows, all of those, or be that via River Radio, be that live or via the Listen Back feature. As I've hinted at there, the Mexico Grand Prix is up next this weekend in terms of watching qualifying if you're in the UK. This is firstly on Saturday and a later time, but not as late as the US, a 9 PM start for the UK viewers or listeners, and going on to the race day, that being Sunday, this being a slightly earlier 8 PM start. That's once again for our British viewers and listeners there. If you want to go and listen or view qualifying or the race from wherever you are, do look it up, and quick Google will show you the answers. A reminder as well, you can follow us on Twitter as well, F1 in Review, all one word obviously, no hyphens, no dashes, no nothing. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back next week to discuss the Mexican Grand Prix, the home race for Sergio Perez, and the fallouts for good or for ill from that one. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.